Good evening, participants. Welcome back in the sense that we just concluded our lecture series on literary criticism and we are starting our American lecture series within a very short span of time. Thank you for joining this course and thank our resource persons also from the core of our heart that they have been very kind enough to accept our invitation. So welcome to this 10 days online lecture series on the history of American literature, where we'll be trying to trace the history right from the 15th century till the postmodern age. And the syllabus that we have framed will cover almost every intricate and important aspects of the American literature. And we wholeheartedly thank our participants as well for choosing the platform once again. Most of our participants from the literary criticism course have rejoined for this course, re-registered. Thank you for that. And there are some new participants also. So thank you for joining. I'm sure you will be in the next 10 days course, you will be enjoying the 11 lectures that we have planned for you all. Today we have among us Dr. Gargi Bhattacharya Chattopadhyay. She is presently heading the Department of English at the International Division of IGNOU in Oman. She has to her credit over 30 articles published in different peer-reviewed journals and has acted as a resource person and speaker in multiple seminars and conferences held globally, both virtually and in person. She has had the teaching experience of 12 years in India and in Oman, both in regular and distant modes. Her interests are in literary theory, criticism, and American literature. And she has also participated in the reviewing process of various international academic journals and has educated PhD thesis as an internal expert. Dr. Gargi, on behalf of Team Dartwaj, we again welcome you. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and accepting the challenge in such a short period of time. We heartily look forward for a very, very fruitful and engaging lecture today. Thank you for accepting our invitation. The platform is all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, and a very warm welcome to all our participants. I hope that this topic, which is much less visited, will give new thoughts, will create new ideas in our minds, and will invigorate our intention, rejuvenate our spirits to visit the American literature and to know how it generated, the genesis, the past, because unless we are aware of the past, we cannot deal with the present and the future new research ideas as well. So this is the period which I am covering, is the exploration period from 1492 to 1607. As already mentioned, the 15th century and the beginning of American literature. I'll discuss a little bit on the American culture. All of us know about the Native American culture, which already it was there, and different tribal people, the Aborigines, as we know, in different continents, other continents of Australia, they are also related in their ideas, mythologies, beliefs, and much of these ideas and beliefs are prevalent even in modern world. And how they are prevalent in my subsequent slides, I'll discuss and I'll try to probe into such ideas and try to make it interesting for all the participants. So Native American cultures, because there are multiple tribes involved in it, they have a rich history of oral literature. This exploration of the European conquests, mainly from Spain, England, and France, they helped us to develop and to synchronize the literature which already existed in the oral tradition, in the oral forms. So the written forms were starting to develop after the European conquests. So this is important. Many symbols many ideas were already existing in the Native American culture, which can be found out even today as engravings on the walls, on the barks of the trees, which are done by the different archaeological researchers. But a proper written transcript is available after 15th century or from 15th century onwards. As we all know, after the famous conquests which are made by the Europeans, Christopher Columbus was the most spoken about, most popular, or rather the first person to visit the coasts of America. And then there were so many people who were coming in search of new land, new business, developing trade relations, and also there was a lot of colonialism. So American Indian were also known as Amerindian, Amerindian, Aboriginal American. They were called in multiple ways. They were they were people of the Western Hemisphere, although the term also connotes only those groups whose original link are to be found in present-day Canada and the United States. Many indigenous American groups were hunting and gathering cultures. Why? Because they were moving from one area to another, while others were agricultural people. So the main source of survival was mainly on the basis of hunting and agriculture. American Indians domesticated a variety of plants and animals, including corn, maize, beans, squash, potato, and other tubers. They were also they were keeping many domestic animals, turkeys, and plants. Vegetation was an important source of sustenance. These and other resources were used to support communities. They were small communities. Some of them were quite big, ranging from small hamlets or villages to cities such as Cahokia, with an estimated population of 10,000 to 20,000 individuals. Okay, and Teotihuacan with some 1,25,000 to 2 lakh residents. So these are some of the facts which we can further explore when we want to delve deep into the Native American culture. Now, what are the main reasons for this exploration which took part from main countries of Europe? We can just summarize it as in short as 3 G's: God, gold, glory. Why God? Because there were religious reasons. We all know that there were religious strives between the Christians, the groups of Christians, the Protestants, the Puritans, and the people who were not following the prevalent church orders were in search of new lands to settle. Gold, because they wanted new resources, they wanted to develop trade relations. Glory, the glory of expansion. They wanted to expand the land, their country, meaning their process of colonization, which is very predominant, and they wanted to expand their empire. So this is another reason. Monarchs. Monarchs see colonization of land. This is a common idea where individuals are sent. So they are sent to establish political control over a land. So this is political and social control is established. by individuals like Christopher Columbus and some others. We will discuss them about them shortly. So they were sent by the kings, by the monarchs, they were financed by them to explore new lands. So what was, again, if we just go back to the past and try to delve out the reasons why Europeans need to explore new world, firstly to create new market for their products and to bring raw materials for them to expand the trade, alleviate poverty and overcrowding. This was another reason, because when the population was growing, they wanted to develop new lands to stop overcrowding and explore new resources. Religious reasons, as we already discussed, the strife between the Puritans, Protestants, and the other sects of Christianity. So some of the important dates when we discuss the 15th century Native American literature can be 1492, first date when Christopher Columbus sails across the Atlantic Ocean and reaches an island in the Bahamas in the Caribbean Sea. In 1498, John Cabot sailed the eastern shore near present-day Worcester County. And in 1507, the name America is used first in a geography book referring to the New World, which Amerigo Vespucci getting credit for the discovery of the continent. So here, this is also discussed by the critic Bayam in his book. We will refer to this again later. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon explores the Florida coast. Again, 1524, Giovanni da Verrazzano explores the coast from Carolina north to Nova Scotia and enters the New York harbor. In 1540, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado explores the southwest. These are the important dates when certain conquests were made. As I discussed earlier, they visited and revisited the continent to explore new resources and land. And also in the process, they settled there. In 1541, Hernando de Soto of Spain discovers the Mississippi River. In 1585, first English settlement in America established at Roanoke Island in the North Carolina. In 1565, St. Augustine, Florida, the first town established by the Europeans. So this is important, that which was the first town which was established by the Europeans in America, and it was founded by the Spanish. And later, when there was a war between them, it was burned by the English in 1586. So in 1588, we all are aware, the students of history of English literature are very much aware of the defeat of the Spanish Armada. So in Europe, the defeat of the Spanish Armada by the English results in Great Britain replacing Spain as the dominant world power and leads to a gradual decline of the Spanish influence in the New World and widening of English imperial interests. So this way, the English became powerful or gained more influence on the coasts of America. In 1600, many nations turned their interest towards this developing country. And in 1606, King James I granted a charter to the Virginia Company to establish a colony in America. And this way, a full-fledged English community and colony developed. Here is a comment which is made by Washington Irving on the life and voyages of Christopher Columbus, which was published in the 19th century. Columbus was a man of great and inventive genius. His ambition was lofty and noble, inspiring him with his high thoughts and anxiety to distinguish himself by great achievements. His conduct was characterized by the grandeur of his views and the nobility of his spirits. Instead of ravaging, plundering the new found countries, he sought to colonize. So here Irving is telling that they were not only interested in vandalizing or looting, plundering, they wanted to establish colony and cultivate the land to civilize the natives. Obviously, there are some controversies here because there were lots of battles fought between the Native Americans and the European conquerors, which were not justified by many critics. He was a valiant and indignant spirit and visionary of an uncommon kind. So here are the praises which are bestowed by Washington Irving on the first person who discovered, or we can say, tried to establish the colony from Europe in America. So we can just have a brief glimpse of the voyage of Columbus. The circumstances which gave rise to Columbus's voyage began. What are the major, apart from the general reasons which we discussed in our previous slide, what are the main reason, what is the main reason which propelled Columbus to discover or to find his route to America? Columbus's voyage began when the Silk Road became dangerous for the Europeans. India and China were vital trade partners. India was a famous country, as we know, known for her riches. It was not regarded as a poor country in the 15th century. So they had resources such as spices, silks, and dyes. So that's why the Silk Road is connected, because silk is very famous commodity for trading with India. The Silk Road was an important trade network which connected Europe to those eastern lands. It became dangerous in 1453 at the time of the fall of Constantinople to Ottoman Turks, who were aggressive towards the west. And then in the 1480s, Columbus was intrigued by Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli's idea that sailing westward from Europe would be the faster route to the Indies. So that's why they came towards the west. Columbus brought his plan to the Portuguese, Genoan, Venetian, and English royalty. They all rejected it, claiming that this will invite death. Columbus' estimates were inaccurate and he was heading for certain death. So this was their opinion and they all rejected the idea of going to the west. Finally, Columbus brought his plans to Spanish King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I in 1486. It took 4 years for them to finally accept it. In 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail for his first voyage out of a total of 4. So the first voyage of Columbus was undertaken in the year 1492. So there were total 4 voyages and the routes are shown in this map. about the voyages of Christopher Columbus. 4 voyages were designed, 4 voyages were made. Now, if I go to the readings from these voyages of Columbus, the first reading is an excerpt from the journal of the first voyage of Columbus. Unfortunately, the original journal kept by Columbus has since been lost. The original records are not available right now. The passage documents Columbus's intentions for his voyage, his embarkation on August the 3rd in 1492. This was the first voyage. The details and the difficulties of the journey, the first contact with the land in the Bahamas on October 11, and the Spaniards' primary interaction with the natives. So this was the first time when the Spaniards interacted with the native Indians, or the Red Indians, as we know them. The second reading is from the narrative of the third voyage. In this passage, Columbus engages in discussions on how, according to these observations and experiences, he believes the earth to be pear-shaped. It is a fallacy that Christopher Columbus discovered America as it was inhabited by many tribes. So it was not known to the Europeans or to other people of the world, but people were there. In addition, other non-natives before him had contact with the Americans, including Europeans. Some, they were not recorded, but some fishermen, Norwegian settlers from Olson and Borneo, they were there. They, as fishermen, they were traveling, but it was not recorded. However, it is still important to discuss the voyages of Columbus, as he felt the European settlement of Central, South, and finally North America. Columbus's initial interactions with the native people of America would set the tone for European Indian relations for centuries to come. So this was a landmark in the history of American literature because it set the trend for the relationship between the two countries, or the continents rather. By reading these primary source documents from Columbus's voyages, one can be critical of the modern portrayal of Columbus, because some of them also think that by discovering this land of the Native Americans, there was a lot of colonization which was forced and which was cruel as well. The alleged discovery of America, because people already visited the place, as mentioned, the fishermen and other people who did not keep a record of it, and the nature of history. What is recorded makes history. What is not recorded does not. This is important. So at the dawn of 16th century CE, because those who don't want to mention the reference to Christ, they use CE instead of AD, as we already know. The European conquest of the Americas began. So it took its full momentum. Indigenous people resided throughout the Western Hemisphere. Indigenous, the local people. They were soon decimated by the effects of epidemic disease, military conquests, and enslavements. So they were slaved, they were forced, they were coerced. This was also happening. With other colonized people, they were subject to discriminatory political and legal policies well into the 20th and even 21st century years. We also know that there are Chicano tribes, Hispanic tribes who are the minorities, and they are suffering, or they are subjected to discriminatory political and legal policies. Some of them are even now fighting for their rights. They have their separate societies. We have like Senecan Indian Society and many other societies. Nonetheless, they have been among the most active and successful native people in affecting political change, regaining the autonomy in areas such as education, land ownership, religious freedom, law, and revitalization of the traditional culture. So this is important that the culture has to be revived and revisited. Subsequent efforts are being undertaken by the National Museum of the American Indian to preserve Native American culture, traditions, and beliefs. Culturally, the indigenous peoples of the Americas are usually recognized as constituting two broad groupings: the American Indians and the Arctic peoples. So in many of the American literature books, they are called peoples in adding a S to people. So this is American English, which is a little bit different from the UK British English. American Indians are often further grouped by areas of residence. I will discuss about three main groups in my subsequent slides: the Mayans, the Incas, and the Aztecs. The Northern American people are from the present-day United States and Canada. Then Middle America, we can say the present-day Mexico and Central America, Peru, those regions. They are called Mesoamerica, and finally the South America. This is this slide presents some of the important references drawn in this presentation, which can be revisited by the researchers and scholars in their subsequent studies on the exploration period. So the Christopher Columbus, as we discussed, the first voyage and the third voyage, the origin of stories. This is important article on how stories develop the oral tradition. Then American European Imagination by Sir Walter Raleigh. The page numbers are also mentioned, which can be, because these books are quite bulky, so these pages are of particular interest. The words are used in they are used in archaic, they're written in archaic English, so some of the spellings are different also. Thomas Harriot, I will discuss on this also: Brief and True Report of Virginia. William Bradford, John Winthrop, Thomas Mott and the New English Canon, and the Roger Williams preface to a key into the language of America. So about the language and their culture, many researchers have published books which are important in current day research. Some of the common proverbs which are very much prevalent in current world has its genesis in the Native American culture or tradition. Some of them are like showing respect to your fellow being. This is mentioned. If we go through this collection, we can find out that some of the common ideas which are prevalent even in modern world, or which are prevalent for every human being universally, irrespective of caste, religion, or region, they can be followed. So they had very good system of moral and ethics, work together for the benefit of mankind. This is one of their common belief system. Remain close to the Great Spirit. So Great Spirit, whatever name we want to call, God or any other name, whatever we call, we should be true devotees. We should have a feeling of devotion in our mind. Do what you know to be right. So they had a strong system of ethics. Give assistance and kindness wherever necessary. So they believe in such universal ideas which are very important even in modern world. So the arrival of the Europeans, the North Americans developed a wide variety of social, cultural, economical structures based in part on the interaction with the environment and with each other. So there was a process of osmosis which was taking place between the Europeans and the Americans. As settlers migrated and settled across the vast expanse of North America, they developed quite different and increasingly complex societies by adapting to and transforming their diverse environments. So in this map, if you can see the regions which were covered by Native Americans and the tribes, some of the most important of them are the three, as I already discussed, the three tribes, the Aztecas, the Mayas, and the Incas. So here we see the regions which were covered by the Incas, this beige color, the Mayas, the green color, and the red color by the Aztecas. So this shows the important areas which were already under the control of the native tribes of America. Despite not possessing a writing system, the Native Americans had vast oratory and literary repertoire of culture, history, and religion. They had their beliefs, and as I discussed, some of the important principles which they followed are relevant to the present day world as well. The literature of the early explorers was mostly narratives and letters, in the form of narratives and letters. These writings describe the new world, the explorers' travels and experiences. Each literary system was unique, reflecting the different culture, background, and beliefs of each respective group. Eventually, the systems come together and evolve into the literature of modern America. So, this is how the evolution of the modern American literature happens, with the literary system and the unique reflecting culture. When we want to try to draw connections between the past and the present, they mirror each other in many ways. To understand the modern literature, one has to look back at the beginning of the American literature. So as I mentioned, this name of Americo Vespucci, an Italian map maker before, he visited America in 1507, as mentioned by Byron. The reference to this book is already given. European explorers found America as a result of questioning the land and water map of the world by the Renaissance scholars. And in search, as we already mentioned, the 3G, the riches, wealth, trading routes to the Far East. So in search of Far East, they went to the West. When the European explorers first reached the New World, it appeared to be a paradise because there were ample natural resources. However, they thought that such resources were not abundant. It was a naive presumption, and it was short-lived as the explorers discovered the Native American people who the explorers believed to be pagan savages, because first they thought that the lands were uninhabited, but later they were coming in contact with the Native American people. The Native American culture was steeped in tradition that had a great respect or honor. HONOUR, this is American spelling, American version, we all know. They had a great respect for the earth. They welcomed the newcomers because they believed in the principle of kindness. They welcomed the newcomers and helped them to survive the harsh winter. The explorers brought European diseases. On the contrary, they brought some diseases like the small pox to the new world that the Native Americans had no immunity. They were not immune to such diseases. Soon they succumbed to such diseases. Many died as a result of these diseases. The explorers took advantage of the Native Americans' hospitality and ignorance of the weapons and overtook their land and conquered them. They manipulated the Native Americans, raped and killed their people, took many as slaves. So the European explorers traveled on behalf of the monarchs, as we discussed, in search of new colonies. This behavior was accepted and encouraged by these monarchs, and they took over the land as their own property. So what was the impact on American literature? Early American literature reflects the distinct differences between the Native Americans and the European explorers. American literature has evolved from diverse early writings. A variety of ideas are imbibed in it. The early American writings from the European explorers are primarily in the form of narratives and letters. These letters describe the explorers' travels and discoveries and serve as a report for the monarchs for whom they traveled. So the report should be positive, and the monarchs should be inspired to fund these travelers to explore further. That was the sole motive. Many writings were used to report progress. As I told, it should be positive. To the monarchs, probably the accounts have romanticized the explorers' experiences in the New World and served as propaganda for their god. So they were working as propagandists and trying to tell the positive things about their exploits. So again, when we go back to the writings of Christopher Columbus and his reports, we will see that Christopher Columbus offers a description of the New World to Louis de Santagal in a letter about his first voyage. Quote unquote, if we just read the lines, many rivers, good and large, with which is marvelous, lofty mountains, beyond comparison, trees of 1,000 kinds, they never lose their foliage. So it was a description of the fauna and the flora, as lovely as they are in Spain in May. So there is a comparison which is made with their homeland in Spain. So they are trying to draw compatibility between the Newfoundland and Spain. So the Native American land and Spain and the similarities, Columbus reports about it. The monarchs expected results, so the explorers' letters needed to convince, because the monarchs were expecting positive results. So the reports had to be positive. they must be convincing. Their work was valuable. Columbus writes such a letter from letters to Luis de Santagal regarding his first voyage, in which he writes the first printed description of America that is translated and soon spread throughout Europe. Again, going back to the oral tradition of American literature, Native American literature evolved from the oral traditions of storytelling and cultural traditions of the narratives, rituals, ceremonies of the Native American people. So they were passed orally from one generation to another generation, culture, tradition, rituals, ceremonies, whatever. The Native American people did not have a written system. So when the explorers discovered America, there was no written American literature. It was fully in the form of poetry. Storytelling was a tradition passed down through the generations. These stories included myths about immortal beings to explain creation and natural occurrences beyond human control. The Ariquis creation story, for example, tells the tale of a woman bearing twin sons, an evil son and a good son, who enriches the earth by first he took the parent's head, created an orb, and it became of a very superior nature to bestow life upon the world. So these are some of the common beliefs which were recorded. We will discuss in this slide some of the mythic style of the narratives of the Native American literature and the literature of exploration as recorded by the European explorers. The myth tells how the good son, it is a continuation about the twin son story. The myth tells how the good son creates the sun and moon and humans and animals for sustenance. This story of Mother Earth and the battle of good and evil is a creation myth similar to many other Native American stories. If we discuss the literature of the European explorers in this regard, it is shaped by the political influences of the European monarchs that they traveled for. The explorers needed to justify, as we told, their travels. So the progressive account was necessary to be reported to the monarchs. In their letters to their homeland, they would describe the beauty of the landscape of the new world, the abundant resources to show the value of their travels to their country. Without justification, the monarchs would no longer fund their journey. That is one important reason, and would send others to take over the exploration. So there was a competition here also. The early Native Americans had only oral stories. These stories did not offer specific political influence. So the stories of the Native American literature were not didactic or not, they were not political propagandas, unlike the European explorers. But the tradition of the tribe could be accounted well in these stories. From a political perspective, rituals, ceremonies, and narrative stories could recount the positions held within the tribe and the structural relation of the community. Stories could also tell of past experiences with outside groups, such as the explorers. David Cusick from the Oneida Reservation in Madison County, New York, provides the Iroquois creation story, which is formed from the collected myths of 25 versions. and is influenced by the political threat of Andrew Jackson's election to presidency and the forces against the Native American people. But this story is not written until late 1700 or the 18th century, as noted by Baum in his book. So availability of the manuscripts of the oral tradition is a challenge for the scholars who try to research on such ancient topics of human interest and cultural interest. The written accounts of the Native American stories were also recorded by Spaniards in journal. They were the first among the conquerors to record the history of the conquests. Juan Mange and Pedro Font in the late 1600s, they were trying to record some of the literary stories or mythical stories. There are no earlier written Native American accounts because they did not have a writing system, as we discussed this already. We can assume that the political influence of the European explorers and their monarchs taking their land, enslaving them, would be reflected in these stories, some of which are written about later in history when Native American literature moves to the written format in the 18th century. Stories were passed down from the elders to the younger generations to carry on the Native American culture, the hostility of the European explorers to this time-honored culture, the changes in their lifestyle, all these were recorded in such written journals. Now, the first important Native American tribe is the Mayan culture or the Mayas. Who were these? They covered the Yucatan Peninsula, which is called the regions of Mexico, surrounding the regions of Mexico or Guatemala. It rose into prominence by 6th century AD. It was important because they were important from the anthropological view. They were known for their expertise in numerical system, astronomy. They built some temples and palaces as well. They were advanced in agriculture. They followed the system of rotation of crops, which is important to maintain the fertility of the land. They mostly grew corn, squash, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, peppers, tomatoes, all these, domesticated turkeys, ducks, dogs. They followed 3 months of farming to produce enough food for family for a year. So they were hardworking, but they were intelligent to maintain the fertility of the land. The reason for their rapid decline is debatable. The Aztecs or the Mexica, they surround the region of south central Mexico. This religion involved, their culture involved human sacrifices. They were also quite advanced in their agriculture, in their system of growing crops, maize, beans, squash, potatoes, avocados, etc. They followed the method of irrigation and intensive cultivation. They were also interested in hunting and domesticated turkeys and dogs. The capital city of Tenochtitlan, which is the later Mexican city, later known to be Mexico, had a population of 240,000 2,40,000. So they fell after Cortes arrived. So they succumbed to the European conquest. The Incas, they were important in the Native American culture and were located in the west coast of South America, the Andes Mountains, surrounding the Andes Mountains. So much of their territory was acquired by force, conquered by Pizarro in 1530s, devastated, and other reasons of their decline was the pandemic of smallpox and other diseases. They also followed the farming methods to sustain their population. They were adept in the skills of farming and domesticated certain animals as well. Now we'll discuss here about the cultural impact of the exploits on the natives. The European explorers brought their culture from their homeland. The early American writings do not include many cultural references in regard to ceremony or art, but it does offer a clear respect and love for their home country, because there are always parallels drawn between their home country and the new lands of Native America. The goal of pleasing the monarch was there. Then Columbus writes to Ferdinand and Isabella, the lands which were here obey your highness. So it was a pleasing statement, or to appease the royalty of Ferdinand and Isabella, it was written. Presents the dedication to the monarchs. The letters from the explorers present disdain for the culture of the native. They were considered pagan, savages. They were not sophisticated in their methods like the Europeans. They believed that their culture, their tradition were not at par with the European civilization. Columbus writes about the Native American that they are encompassed by a million savages, full of cruelty, because in some tribes human sacrifice was there in the name of religion, Aztecs, as we noted. The explorers did not respect the Native Americans' culture. They instead chose to overthrow them and change their ways of life. So they wanted to change their ways of life, their ways of thinking in many ways. So here we will also note the influence on religion and a comparative studies on the writings of Columbus and Alvar Nunes. Religious influence can be seen in both European explorer and Native American literature. The European explorers often refer to their Christian values and serving God in their letters and narratives. So this is very prominent in their narratives. Preserving Christianity and converting the pagans to their religion was highlighted, was very important to the explorers. Columbus describes his worry about being away from church in his letter to Ferdinand and Isabella. So separated from the holy sacraments of the Holy Church, my soul will be forgotten if church is my body. So he was showing his angst that he's not able to visit the churches. And he is also anxious that if his soul departs from his body in this land, so he will not receive the sacraments of the church. Alvar Nunes Cabeza de Vaca describes the explorer's religious zeal in his narrative. From the relation of Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, strangers vie in approbation with those motivated by religion and loyalty. The Native Americans' religion reflected their honor of nature and earth. So they were considered pagan because they worshipped earth, nature in many ways. It is interesting to note the roots of transcendental philosophy in this particular tradition of Native Americans, where earth was imbibed with some spiritual presence. The Native American people celebrated spiritual presence in all things. Their creation myths offer examples of animals and people with supernatural powers and the earth as a vessel of sustenance. Their religious ceremonies and rituals were passed down via oral storytelling. The Oedipus creation story, as we already discussed, shares a version of the Mother Earth myth, along with examples of supernatural animals. The turtle increased every moment and became a considerable island of art, quote unquote, as noted by Byron. Native American literature offers the influence of the importance of nature and honoring earth. Interestingly, this philosophy of transcendentalism, which predominates the works of Emerson, Thoreau, Whitson, etc., had its roots in the beliefs of the Native Americans. So it is interesting to find the present rooted in the past. So some of the common beliefs of the Native Americans which are compatible with the philosophy of transcendentalism can be recorded or noted as follows. Everything we see around us is a reflection of God. The physical world is a doorway to the spiritual world. People can use intuition to see God in nature and their souls. A person in their own way, authority, feeling and intuition are superior to reason and intellect. Thus, worshipping nature by the Native Americans is justified by the transcendentalists. Modern American literature evolved from the early foundations of the country's literary ancestors. The European explorers brought their writing system with them to the New World. They wrote journals, letters, and narratives of their experience in this new place. The evolution of the written form again can be revisited, and we can note some points here. The Native Americans adopted written language in the time of Columbus. It was completely oratory, but later they adopted the modern natives who are existing. They obviously follow the written tradition. Some of them were recorded in the later centuries, though initially at the time of Columbus's visit in 1492, it was completely in the form of oratory. Oral storytelling was the way that history, culture, and religion were passed down. The practical accounting method of writing from the European explorers, along with the creative storyteller or the Native Americans, can be credited with the origins of American literature. So the writing method was made popular after the advent of the European explorers. The basic features of Native American literature include worshipping nature, interaction with nature is portrayed in its stories and poems. dominance of myths and rituals, and oral tradition. Existence of ancient hieroglyphic and pictographic writings of the Middle America, as well as an extensive set of folk tales, can be well noted in the native tradition. We can try to elucidate some of the famous pictographs from the Native American tradition. What is a pictograph? It is a picture that represents a word phrase and are earliest forms of writing. The Native Americans wrote pictographs on or engraved, or they used to write on stones their symbols or make symbols. Engravings were there. Pictographs on the rocks, cave walls, buffalo hides. Through this, they used to tell stories of battles and communicate important warnings and messages. Pictographs are drawn onto rock surfaces with natural pigments. Petroglyphs are curved or scraped into the surface with tools, sharp edges of the tools. Some symbols are used to convey metaphorical meanings. For example, the arrow is a literal representation of the bow and arrow weapon. It is used to acquire food for one's tribe. In a more metaphorical sense, the arrow represents protection and defense. A broken arrow symbolizes peace among the existing tribes. Even in modern world, such pictographs are relevant. For example, the seal of the Cherokee Nation was created by an executive art under Chief Lewis Downing in 1869. The act calls for the seal to contain a 7-pointed star inside of a wreath of oak leaves, symbolizing the eternal flame of Cherokee. What is the Cherokee? This is the modern version of the North American Indians of Iroquois lineage. We just discussed so much the creation myth of the Iroquois, the earlier tribes of the Native Americans, who constituted one of the largest politically integrated tribes at the time of European colonization of the American people. The Cherokee Indians have the distinct physical characteristics which are associated with Native Americans. This includes high cheekbones, bent nose, reddish brown skin tone, coarse dark hair, almond-shaped heavy eyes, which are the characteristics of the Cherokee Indians, a trait that is due to an extra fold in the eyes. And the point of the stars represent the 7 traditional Cherokee clans. The butterfly symbolizes life, hope, change, and endurance. These symbols are relevant undoubtedly to our contemporary world. Some of the symbols here can be seen, like I'll try to share this slide later also. The campfire good with a dot on the which is top on the sleeping line, horizontal line, it is good, and the bad is just when there is a spot down the horizontal line, it symbolizes bad. Then man and woman signs symbols were there, symbol of the great spirit. As we already noted that they believe that we should stay close to the great spirit and show respect. boy, girl, mountains, lakes. These are quite understandable even now. The symbol of the eagle, turtle, fish, and many fish here. So it's interesting. And some of these symbols are prevalent even now. And the eagle symbol, turtle. So it's a very interesting study. Some URLs are given at the end of this presentation to refer to such interesting science and probe deeper into it. One adaptation frequently used by the storyteller was the repetition of incidents. The description of an incident would be repeated a specific number of times. The number of repetitions really corresponded to the number associated with the sacred, meaning some consider 7 as the sacred, some consider 5 as the sacred, others 3, like that. So that many time of repetitions was followed. In Christian tradition, the sacred is most often counted in threes. We all know the Trinity, the idea of the Trinity, and with that, 3 is considered sacred. In Native American traditions, the sacred is most often associated with groups of 4, representing the cardinal directions and the deities associated with each. So they were based more on nature, the 4 directions, and the deities which are associated with each respective directions. The skyward, earthward, and the center. The hero would kill the number of monsters on or that many brothers who had gone out on the adventure, on the same adventure. This type of repetition was very effective. Why? Because repetition firmly inscribes the images and the incidents on the minds of the listeners. In modern day, we find that the advertisements are repeated a number of times also to cast a deep impact on the mind of viewers. So this same way of repetition was important. So some other interesting facts about mythologies are, in North America, many mythologies such as dreaming, also which is related to the Australian Aborigines, same idea. It deals with a period in the distant past in which the world was different and people could not be distinguished from animals. These mythologies are related to the concept that all animals have souls or spirits that give them some supernatural power. Mythology consists primarily of animal tales and stories of personal and social relationships. The actors and characters involved in these stories are also an index to the belief and of the custom of the people. For example, the Navajo ceremonials, like the chants, are based entirely on the characters and incidents in the mythology. The dancers make masks under strict ceremonial control when they wear them to represent gods. They absorb spiritual strength. The Aztec ceremonials and sacrifices, as we noted, the Aztecs were known for human sacrifices. The Aztec ceremonials and sacrifices are believed to placate the gods who are the heroes of the mythology. The Inca, the other important tribe of the Native Americans, they believed with the Inca civilization is grouped with the sophisticated culture of Mesoamerica, the Mexican part, because it resembles them from closely than it does with the South. As far as mythological history can be traced, the Incas worshipped Viracocha, the creator. The name is their belief in God, in the god Viracocha. He was the omnipotent being who took part in every mythological incident. He created people from painted stone, dolls, a specific way of saying that humans evolved from the living rock. He also had the capacity for infinite self-multiplication. Some of his offsprings became local gods. So this was the popular belief of the Incas. Such beliefs you can find, we can explore more with the sites which I have noted at the end of the presentation. Viracocha created the sun, moon, stars because humans whom he created again lived in darkness. The folk tales of Caba, who inhabited the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in Colombia, are religious in nature, having supernatural characters who arrange the world for humans and try to control the demons that plague them. So such popular myths are predominant in Native American culture among the different tribes of Native America. Many islands in the Caribbean were populated by people who came from the northern part of South America. The Arawak were the first Indians who encountered the New World by Columbus at Hispaniola. Typical migrant from the tropical forests of South America, they combined the concept of a guardian spirit with fetish worship and fabricated idols that represented plants, animals, humans, and spirits. So there are different mythologies which are related to the Arawak Indians. They were soon decimated by the Spanish invaders in the Caribbean. By 1535, only 500 were left at Hispaniola. The Spanish, therefore, brought in black and other Indians to work on plantations. The situations also occurred in Puerto Rico and Jamaica. The Indians, because of the subsequent influx of the black civilization, they were some sort of mingling. Now we will discuss about the Hispanic civilization or the Hispanics. Hispanic studies at several American universities take a distinctly transatlantic interdisciplinary approach to the literatures and cultures of Spain and Latin America. The Recovering of the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Project seeks to gather lost or rare documents and publications pertinent to Hispanic history and culture. After the conquest, historical accounts were written that iterated the past history of the Aztec region. Much of what is known today about the early history of the Aztecs is derived from these works. A method of recording Nahuatl, the language portion of Mexico, was combined with Spanish to supplement the graphic record. It is believed that some of the graphic records represent oral tradition, possibly learned in chants that were recited on ceremonial occasions. American literary history begins with the age. Now the literary history begins mainly with the age of colonialism, because that time they were noted, recorded, and published. People could read about them. So the character of the early American literature is influenced by the following factors. It was the era of colonizing the continent, since not only the English explored and claimed the territories, the beginnings of American literature are more or less connected with French, Spanish, Dutch, or English literatures as well. So the first writers brought many English ideas and ways of writing, which means that early American literature is based on the literature of England. It was influenced by the literature of England. As years passed and literary theory developed, the writers who adapted the English style are now sometimes called pale faces. Some of them are Franklin, Longfellow, James Pound. Their poetry is sometimes referred as cooked poetry. On the other hand, there were authors who explored new topics and helped shape the America's literary tradition, like Whitman, the Beat Generation, Emerson. Their poetry is referred to as raw poetry. Again, religion played an important part in the writer's life. Many writings of the period were in the form of sermons and theological books. The fact that pilgrims landed in the Massachusetts Bay in 1620 had an immense influence on the culture of the newly developed colonial system. The topics which were mostly mentioned during this time were related to agriculture, exploration, relation with the native people, and travelogues. John Smith was an important contributor and is considered to be the first American writer. He was an explorer and colonist. He helped to find the new city of Jamestown in 1607. His writing A True Relation of Virginia is said to be the first American book written in English. It describes the problems of colonizing the area. William Bradford from 1590 to 1657 was a Puritan writer who described life in early English settlement, and his book, very famous, of Plymouth Plantation, is full of religious topics and depictions of difficulties in the colony. Later, we know, which will be discussed in the next period, in the next session, about Anne Bradstreet, who followed in suit with her religious poetry. Some of the modern critics engage in polemics or discussions, debates over the possession of the Spain, over the possession of the Spain, over the lands of the Native Americans. For example, Ronella Adorno argues in a book that the core of the Spanish American literary tradition consists of writings in which the rights to Spanish dominion in America and the treatment of its natives were highly debated. She places the works of canonical Spanish and Amerindian writers of the 16th and 17th centuries within the larger polemic and shows how their works should be sought with credibility within the narrative system itself, rather than in the irregular historical event that lay outside it. Alva Nunes Cabeza de Vaca's account of Doom Narvaez's expedition to the vast unexplored lands beyond the northern frontier of New Spain has long been heralded as the quintessential tale of Europeans confronting the wilderness of North America and its native inhabitants for the first time. We will just reflect a few ideas about Alva Nunes. On December 1526, Charles V commissioned Panfilo de Narvaez to explore, conquer, and settle a portion of North America called La Florida, a territory vaguely described as stretching along the Gulf Coast from Mexico to Florida. Cabeza de Vaca was named treasurer by royal appointment, a position that put him second in command and made him chiefly responsible to look after the emperor's interest during the expedition. During 8 years of traveling across what is now the US Southwest, he became a trader and faith healer to various Native American people before reconnecting with Spanish civilization in Mexico in 1536. When we explore his writings, he wrote an account first published in 1542, the account and commentaries. His account offers an isolated glimpse of areas of Gulf coastal Texas and northeastern Mexico. Cabeza de Vaca reported on the customs and the ways of American Indian life, aware of his status as an early European explorer. He described details of the culture of the Malhado people, the Capuic, and the Han American Indians, such as their treatment of the offspring, their wedding rites, their main source of food, etc. Cabeza de Vaca and his 3 fellow survivors at times served as slaves to the American Indians to survive. Through his observations, Cabeza de Vaca provides insight into 16th century American Indian life near the present-day Mexico-Texas border. Another important conquistator is Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who was born in 1492, the year when Columbus sailed. There is a doubt. Also, some researchers and critics claim that it's 96. However, it was the year when Columbus sailed, as we know, far to the Atlantic. He was a Spanish conquistator. What is the meaning of this word? This refers to knight, soldiers and explorers of the Spanish Empire who participated as a soldier in the conquest of Mexico under Hernan Cortes. They defeated the Aztecs, as we noted. He was famous in his later years as an encomendero and a governor in Guatemala, where he wrote his memoirs called The True History of the Conquest of New Spain. From his almost lyrical descriptions, it is clear that Bernal Diaz had high respect for Aztec political and social organization, for the skills and talents of the Aztec workers and craftsmen, for the remarkable city that stood on pilings and built up land. Diaz's account is written in an unassuming colloquial style and has both historical and artistic value. What are the factors that helped the Spanish to defeat Aztecs? Some of them are superior weapons, then alliance and experience. The invading Spanish forces took advantage of internal division within the Aztecs and Incas. As we discussed, the 2 separate tribes, they had difference of opinions, and the Spanish Empire took advantage of it. The power of the horses, deadly diseases, all resulted in the succumbing of the Aztec civilization. While the military affairs were the focus of Bernal Diaz's account, he also devoted ample attention to the people and custom he encountered. Throughout his work, Bernal Diaz manifested great respect for the warriors who challenged Cortez's army during its march towards Mexico. He commented on their light but effective cotton armor, arrows, darts, etc. His account also makes it clear that steel swords, crossbows, firearms, cannons, and horses provided the Spanish army with full tools for battle, and finally they could win over the Aztecs. Next important contributor is Thomas Harriot. He was famous already as an explorer, scientist, was the first English compiler and publisher of information related to the New World. By 1580, Harriot had already been tutoring Sir Walter Raleigh, who will be studied in the next period, and his sea captains in mathematics and navigation for a few years, and was involved in the initial planning of Raleigh's Roanoke venture in 1583. His first-hand experience in England's early attempts at exploring and colonizing the New World came from his participation in the Second Roanoke expedition, which took place in 1585. After returning to England, Harriot lent his navigational expertise to helping the English defeat the Spanish Armada, which is very famous in the history of English literature, and it took place in 1588. By the mid-1600s, Harriot returned to his mathematical and astronomical interests, which he pursued until his death in 1621. Harriot's brief and true report, first published in 1588, was an account of his exploration during the 1585 expedition. Richard Hakluyt included it in his compendium titled Principal Navigations of the English Nation, which was published next year. Samuel D. Champlain was born in France and died in Quebec, Canada. He was a French explorer, acknowledged founder of the city of the Quebec. Champlain sailed down the coast of New England as far south as Cape Cod, although a few British explorers had navigated the terrain before. Champlain was the first to give a precise and detailed account of the region that would one day become Plymouth's Rock. When Champlain returned to France, he found himself embroiled in certain lawsuits and was unable to return to Quebec. He spent his life writing the stories of his voyages, completed with maps and illustrations. When he was reinstated as a lieutenant, he returned to Canada. Some other important facts about Champlain is Champlain spent more time writing about his travels until in 1632, the British and the French signed the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, returning Quebec to the French. Champlain returned to be its governor. He was the first to make a map of the coast of North America, and many places have been named after him, including Champlain Bridge, Lake Champlain, and Champlain Valley. He is best known for establishing the first French settlement in the Canadian territory and founding the city of Quebec. Because of this, Champlain became known as the father of New France. Samuel D. Champlain's brief discourse between 1598 to 1601 gives insight into the native land of North America. It is certain that the artistic rendering of landscape, the flora, fauna, and the words that describe them is a valuable early view of America. Now I'll discuss about Senecan legend before I wind up. The Seneca, or the word literally means the Great Hill people, are a group of indigenous European speaking people native to who historically lived to the Lake Ontario. Like they lived south of Lake Ontario. Their nation was the furthest to the west within the Six Nations of the Iroquois League. In the 21st century, more than 10,000 Seneca live in the United States, which has 3 federally recognized Seneca tribes. 2 of them are centered in New York, the Seneca Nation of Indians, with 2 reservations in western New York near Buffalo, and the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. Details about them can be mentioned in the website related to Seneca Meet. It's mentioned, it can be studied. Jeremiah Curtin's collection, published in 1923, makes an interesting reading as well on the Senecan culture and tradition. So here I would like to ruminate on a few beliefs of the natives. The Native American, following the pace of the Indian time, still lives connected to the nurturing womb of mythology. Mysterious but real power dwells in nature, mountains, rocks, and even pebbles. While people may consider them inanimate objects, but to the Indians, they are enmeshed in the wave of the universe, pulsating with life and potent with medicine. As Ernest Cassirer has noted, that the mythical world is at a much more fluid and fluctuating state than our theoretical world. The world of the myth is a dramatical world, a world of actions, of forces, of conflicting powers. In every phenomenon of nature, it sees the collision of these powers. Mythical perception is always impregnated with these emotional qualities. Such ideas resonate strongly in the works of American transcendentalism, as I have already mentioned. Language spoken by the Senecas, they speak English in today's world, but some elders also speak the native Seneca language. It is a complex language. The pronounced as IGNOU in a friendly greeting, and Miawin, meaning thank you. Today, Seneca is an endangered language because most children aren't interested in learning it anymore. Some Senecan Indians are working to keep their language alive. So if we draw the inference here, we can say that the Native Americans adopted some of the European ways, and the Europeans adopted some of their ways as well. Even in today's world, as I mentioned, some of their symbols, some of their beliefs, some of their culture, tradition, and ideas are prominent because they are universal in nature. Native Americans have made many valuable contributions to American culture, particularly in the areas of language, art, food, and government. Native Americans learned to grow and use many different kinds of food that many people eat today. They follow the rotation of crops, which is a very scientific method practiced even today. So socially, culturally, anthropologically, literally, they have significance in our contemporary lives as well. Their literary influence is much prevalent in the writings of the 19th century transcendentalists and the contemporary beat generation as well. So I would like to end this session of the exploration period between 1492 to 1607 here. And I would like to finish and ask the participants about their experience and opinions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Gargi. I would request the participants to please type your questions in the chat box. Any questions that you have, please type in the chat box. The chat box is open for your questions. You can give your observation as well. We will have a short discussion on the questions, and in our sessions before, we have seen that some questions are very critical and very pertinent. A very elaborate, exhaustive, and very descriptive session, which needed a lot of attention, because this kind of this topic in American literature, generally we don't get it that much in an elaborative form. So we thought of, giving this particular unit a space, and equally it becomes very challenging for people to present. But as I had said during the starting of our lecture, that we are really very thankful that Dr. Gargi took on the challenge, in the sense because we didn't give her a lot of time to prepare, and she prepared it exhaustively, as you might have seen. So please put forward a few questions which you have. We can have it here, and then the book that we are planning on, American literature, which will be based primarily on these sessions. Your questions will find a place. If the questions are pertinent, you will find a place in that book as well. We have few questions, Dr. Gargi. If you are comfortable, I will take it. The first question is, does Indian Americans mean Indians from India dwelling there?
Indians, American Indians are, they don't have any direct connection with the Indians. As such, as we know, India is a separate country, and the American Indians, or the Native Americans, they were the aboriginal people of America before the Europeans explored the land of America. So the name or the idea or the name can be associated as Indians, but it doesn't have any direct connection as such with the Indians, because India was already established that time, famous for its riches, silk, spices, and all. Trading was going on between Europe and India. They wanted to find another route, because the as I mentioned, the popular silk route was endangered. So in that process, Christopher Columbus wanted to explore from another direction from the west, and found the land of the Native Americans, which is called, they were, because it is associated, partly maybe this is not explained well, it is a controversial. They wanted to discover another route for India, and in the process they landed over to America, and that's why they might have named it as American Indians, but they don't have as such any direct connection.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is, does transcendentalism have any connection with the Indian notion of spirituality?
We all know that Emerson was highly influenced by the notion of Indian spirituality. T.S. Eliot was influenced in the Westland, where he repeats the word and he ends his poem with Shanti, which is related with Indian spirituality in the Vedas. Emerson was also influenced, and he was definitely, there is a connection. Research papers have been written on it, and we can explore those papers where there is a connection between Emersonian transcendentalism and Indian spirituality. It's obviously there, but I try to probe here from a different angle. This idea about worshipping nature and finding the omnipresence of the great spirit in nature is in transcendentalism, which was there with the Native Americans. So I try to highlight or shed light on this idea, which may be explored or may be debated over.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is, can you please elaborate or throw some light on the concept of raw poetry and cooked poetry?
Yes, this was done by Byam in his writing on American literature, and I have already, in my reference, I have mentioned her name, that he has referred to this idea about the Emersonian Whitman. They were connected with the ideas which were there with the indigenous people, and that's why there is a notion of raw poetry, and the poets in America who were more influenced by the English writings, they were called the cooked poets or cooked poetry. Their poetry was more like cooked poetry. Meaning that this is the notion of the critic, which I have referred here, and details can be found in this book also. So she referred to that people who were writing from their original perception of the native people, Native Americans' writings, they were categorized as raw poets. And those who followed the English writers, they were the cooked poets, as categorized by Ban.
This is a very potent question to be asked in competitive examinations. The next question is, it's an interesting question. The next question is regarding the use of the term discovery under inverted. Isn't it a problematic term? Because the world's European discovered already existed, and as you said, carried a very, very rich civilization and culture. What are your observations?
Actually, what is history? History is deconstructed, as we researchers do often deconstruction. So history is what is recorded, and there are so many oral or so many histories which are not recorded. So they are histories, but they do not attract our attention because they are not recorded. Similarly, Christopher Columbus recordings or his letters to Isabella was recorded and was mentioned, was published. It was distributed among so many readers. That's why it is believed that he was the discoverer of this land. But many fishermen from other European countries came and visited the land before. As some critics have noted, I mentioned this, so it is a problematic term because it was not recorded. And when something is absolutely nobody knows about it, we say we have discovered. But some people knew but did not record it. Christopher Columbus was the first person to make a formal record of it. That's why we say that he has discovered. So the truth is what is constructed.
The next question is, can you please suggest some post-colonial novels which is written from the perspective of Native American people?
Yes, there are. I was discussing one writer already. I don't know who was debating over this polemics of Spanish and Native Americans. There are novels. I have to look for it if there are any fictional form of this fact of this conquest. But there are many writings, modern writings on Native American discoveries or the relevance of the Native Americans in contemporary life. There are many prose works on it, but fiction work, I am not sure of it. We have to find out.
That you can do when you can answer the questions we will mail you.
Yeah, sure.
At ease. The next question is the fact that is passed on to us that Columbus was on the voyage to discover India, but landed up in America, not really knowing it, and called it India. Is it really true?
It was part of it is true, as I told, because India was in the 15th century land of riches. So many people from, we know that from Mughal emperors and all, they came to invade India. Why? Because so much things, so much resources were there. So everyone wanted to come to India. That is for certain. And many people from Europe visited India. But in this process, they wanted the Silk Route, which was the common route, was in some problem. As we know that now also in Suez Canal, in this our global news, we heard that the Suez Canal is blocked by a very big ship. We all have heard about it, and they are trying to move the ship because it is preventing trade. This is a very contemporary issue. So similarly, I can refer to this to explain the idea that the Silk Route was overpopulated. So explorers were trying to find out other routes to India and the Asian countries. And in this process, they found America. That's certain. This part is true. But because of this, they named it as Native American land or Native Indians. The race that were the tribes that were already there, they were named Indians because of this reason. That is also debatable. That can be discussed. That has to be endorsed by many researchers and critics. But it is just a way of looking at it. Like I think that maybe because the Indians' name was given, in the process they were trying to find India and landed with these tribes. So it's an idea which came to my mind, and it can be explored further with the researchers.
Thank you, ma'am. We take the last question of the day, although there are few more questions, but we will mail you. And the answers to those questions, we will in the later phase, when we get it, we will share it with the participants as well. So we take the last question of the day, and that is how far the myth about the Iroquois creation can be related to the Greek mythological notion of the creation of Earth.
There are so many myths, and validity of these myths can't be questioned. And some myths are related, like I mentioned that about the dreaming myth, that the animals have soul. This myth is found in Australian Aboriginal culture as well. Some myths are connected, some myths are not connected. We can compare between them, of course, but we cannot align all myths. That all myths, even in our culture, we have so many myths. So myths are based on our belief system. Sometimes it matches with others, other times it doesn't match. But all Greek myths do not match with the Native American myths or the Indian myths, whatever. But there are some resemblances. There are multiplicity of gods as opposed to the belief of the Christians who believe in only one God. That is there. The Greeks also believed in a multiplicity of gods. And Indians, Hindus also believed they have different names of the gods and goddesses. Even the Native Americans believed in in each direction, for each direction, they have separate gods. So this multiplicity of gods is there in Greece, in India, in Native American, in other cultures as well. It's not identical, but the basics are related. They can be related.
Okay, ma'am, with this, we come to the end of this very captivating and interesting session. A session which dealt with the 15th century, primarily history of American literature. It was really a very insightful session. provided that this is something which generally is not prescribed in the courses of our graduation or masters. And with that perspective in mind, we had introduced it. And thank you very much, Dr. Gargi, for truly justifying this particular unit. We are really overwhelmed. We are happy and we are proud to have you again on this platform. Thank you so much for your kind cooperation. And definitely we'll look forward to having you on this platform in the near future. From now, a happy Holi to you all, including Dr. Gargi. Happy Dol, Dr. Gargi. And hope to see very soon you. And participants, please join us for tomorrow's session at 6 o'clock. Dr. Gargi, if you have time, you also can join us. And so that we can all have an academic feast and endeavor together. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much. Take care. Good night.
Thank you so much. Wishing you the same and to all the participants. Have a nice
Thank you so much.
evening.
Take care. Good night.